Welcome to day 2 of the second edition of the online Kirloskar Vasundhara Ram Nadi festival. Yesterday, we took a trip along the entire Ram Nadi, visited its source region, and also heard about river restoration in the urban context. We have a packed episode lined up for you today as well. We are going to visit schools, the Pashan Lake, Khatpewadi Lake, and hear from the locals as well. We begin the day with Gauri Kirloskar, who will walk us through everything that has happened on the Ram Nadi over the past 1 year. Gauri is a young and dynamic leader who has been guiding the Kirloskar Vasundhara International Film Festival. She returned to India in 2010 after finishing her BSc in Business Administration. Since then, she has been focusing her efforts on strategic initiatives for the Kirloskar groups on investments and infrastructure and has been the director and observer of many Kirloskar group companies. Let's hear from Gauri.
Kirloskar Vasundhara Ram Nadi Restoration Mission was initiated to create a holistic and sustainable model of river restoration to heal the lifelines of India. We are fortunate that young students from various colleges have enthusiastically participated to convert awareness-oriented programs into actions. Through our Green College, Clean College program, a number of ideas were coined and some of them were implemented also. Apart from regular activities like plant restoration, cleaning drive, dissolved oxygen level monitoring, photo walk, conferences, and Ram Nadi Parikrama, we were able to introduce new concepts also. Recently, we installed floating beds at Khatpewadi Lake. These 4 beds were designed and created by a team from H.V. Desai College. This experiment was appreciated by visual media. A number of district collectors have decided to replicate this model to purify the water bodies in their region. We carried out an Indian lotus plantation drive to maintain the hydrogen balance in the water. Pune will soon witness its first beautiful lotus lake. I welcome you for this knowledgeable online festival about Ram Nadi. I also appeal to my young friends to come forward and ensure at least 15 minutes a day for environmental protection.
It is impossible to miss the garbage lying in the river and on its banks when you visit the Ram Nadi. The Ram Nadi Restoration Mission has organized cleanup drives to bring people to the river, to connect them with her, and of course to clean a small part of the garbage that is creating a problem for the river. Let's watch the next film about these cleanup drives. An important part of the Ram Nadi restoration mission is training the trainers. The purpose is to amplify the mission through the teachers and bring about a change in our children who are our future. Let's watch how these trainings are conducted.
श्री शंतनुराव किर्लोस्करांनी एक आदर्श घालून दिला आणि त्या आदर्शावरती आमची कॉर्पोरेट सोशल रिस्पॉन्सिबिलिटी आधारित आहे पूर्णतः. आणि हा आदर्श अगदी सोपा आहे की जो काही बदल घडवून आणायचा आहे समाजामध्ये तो मुलांमध्ये घडवून आणा, त्यांच्यावरती संस्कार करा. आणि हे संस्कारांचा फोकस हा आरोग्य, स्वच्छतेविषयीच्या सवयी आणि पर्यावरणाविषयीची जागरूकता याच्यापुरता मर्यादित ठेवला आणि सतत जर वर्षानुवर्षे काम करत राहिलं तर हा बदल नक्की घडून येणार. मला वाटतं आपणा सर्वांच्या सहकार्याने, विशेषतः शिक्षक इथे जे जमले त्यांच्या सहकार्याने, आमच्या तज्ज्ञांच्या सहकार्याने मला वाटतं हे उपक्रम येत्या 2-3 वर्षामध्ये खूप चांगलं स्वरूप धारण करेल.
की जी कामं सरकारी माध्यमातून होत नाही ती NGO म्हणजे स्वयंसेवी संस्थांच्या माध्यमातून खूप लवकर होतात. त्याचं कारण ते मिशन म्हणून करतात. आणि या स्वयंसेवी संस्थांमध्ये शिक्षकांची भूमिका खूप मोठी असते हे मी सांगायला नको. कारण एका वयात येईपर्यंत का होईना परंतु विद्यार्थी त्यांचं ऐकत असतो. त्या विद्यार्थ्यांच्या ताकदीवर आपल्याला खूप गोष्टी करतात. हा जो एक पीपल्स पार्टिसिपेशन, लोक सहभागाचा प्रयोग तुम्ही करताय त्याला शुभेच्छा देतो.
आपण आपल्या पिढीचे लोक फार काही बदल करू शकत नाही. आपण करू म्हणतो पण ज्यांच्यामुळे पुढे घडणार आहे, ज्यांच्यामुळे मुलं तयार होणार, त्याच्या शिक्षकांना जर आपण सांगितलं आणि शिक्षकांशी असतं की शिक्षकांनी जे काही सांगितलं असतं ते मुलांना पटतं लगेच आणि मुलं लगेच ते आचरणात आणत असतात. त्यामुळे मी म्हटलं की आपण पहिले आपल्या शिक्षकांना सांगूया.
आम्ही असं ठरवलं की राम नदीच्या काठावरच्या साधारणतः 100 सोसायटी असतील, तसंच 25 शाळा देखील यामध्ये असल्या पाहिजेत आणि महानगरपालिकेचं शिक्षण मंडळ असेल किंवा अनेक प्रायव्हेट शाळा या ठिकाणी आहेत, त्या सर्वांच्या मॅनेजमेंट कमिटीच्या सहकार्याने आज आपला हा कार्यक्रम होतो आहे.
ट्रेन द ट्रेनर्स, आपण काहीतरी शिकायला निघालेलो आहोत. ही नदी जसं डॉक्टर येतो आणि माझ्या घरी जर कोणी आजारी असेल तर आपण मग डोकं ठीक आहे का, रक्त ठीक आहे का, शरीर ठीक आहे का असं पाहत होतं. आपण हे नदीचं शरीर बघायचं अगदी थोडक्यात बघणार आहे. वरचा भाग आहे जिथनं पाणी जमा होतं, हे पठार आहे जिथनं हे पाणी वाहतं आणि सगळ्यात शेवटी आपली जी राम नदी आहे ती मुळा नदीला जाऊन भेटते. हे शरीर समजूयात ह्या नदीचं. माणसं बदलली तर नदी बदलणार. माणसांना कोण बदलणार हो? 3.5 लाख माणसं. आपल्यापैकी काही लोकांना लीड घ्यावं लागेल. एक आहे जलसाक्षरता, म्हणजे अशा अभ्यास वर्गामध्ये आपण एकमेकांकडनं शिकत राहणं. इथे कुठेही टॉप टू डाऊन नसतं. तुम्ही जे प्रतिक्रिया द्याल त्यातनं आम्ही पण शिकणार आहोत. तर अभ्यास वर्गामध्ये आपण कायम राहणे ही जलसाक्षरता आहे. आणि त्यानंतर जलसंस्कार आहे. रोज काहीतरी ॲक्शन नदीसाठी करायची विचारपूर्वक आणि मग आपल्या आजूबाजूच्या लोकांवरती ते संस्कार करायचे. ह्या 2 गोष्टी जरी झाल्या तरी आपलं ट्रेन द ट्रेनर्सचा पहिला जो उद्देश आहे तो कंप्लीट होईल. त्याच्या पुढे जलसंस्कृती होते, म्हणजे घरोघरी लोकांना नदी एवढी कळते की आपल्याला असे लेक्चर घ्यायची गरज नाही. आईबाबाच मुलांना शिकवते. ही वेळ येऊ देत आपल्या राम नदीमध्ये की इतकी ही जलसाक्षरता झाली, इतके जलसंस्कार झाले की जलसंस्कृती ही राम नदीची संस्कृती झाली. मग आपल्याला असं काही टॉक घ्यायची गरज नाही. घरीच लहान मुलांना आईबाबा शिकवते. तर इथपर्यंत जर आलो आपण जलसंस्कृतीपर्यंत, जलसमाज निर्माण होतो. मग त्याचं संविधान काढता येईल आणि नदी संसद म्हणून तयार करता येईल.
की आमचा हा उद्देश असा आहे की तुम्हाला शिक्षकांना आम्ही आतापर्यंत ह्या गोष्टीत सांगणार आहे. हे ट्रेनिंग म्हणता येणार नाही, थोडं अवेअरनेस म्हणता येईल. यानंतर मात्र आम्ही तुमच्या प्रत्येक शाळेमध्ये येणार आणि हे जे काही 40 कर्मी कार्यक्रम आहेत, मग तुमच्या शाळेचे मुख्याध्यापक आणि आपण चर्चा करूया की यातले कुठले कार्यक्रम तुमच्या शाळेमध्ये राबवता येते.
The residents who lived along the banks of the Ram Nadi remember a very different river from the one that we see today. They remember her being sparkling and clean, bringing prosperity and joy to the residents of the area. Let's hear from the residents themselves about how the Ram Nadi was just a few decades ago.
लहानपणी साधारणपणे 7-8 वर्षाचा असताना या सोमेश्वरवाडी परिसरात जी रामनदी आहे, ह्या रामनदीमध्ये सर्वजण जे शाळेत जात असताना आम्ही या नदीमध्ये पोहायचो. ज्यावेळेस आम्ही या रानामध्ये क्रिकेट खेळायला जायचो, त्या क्रिकेट खेळल्यानंतर या नदीच्या कडेला जे काही झरे आहेत, या झऱ्यांमध्ये आम्ही पाणी साठवून या पाण्याचा वापर आम्ही पिण्याकरता करायचो. तसेच या सोमेश्वरवाडी भागातील ह्या सर्व भाग हा सुपीक प्रकारे मानला जायचा. या शेतजमिनीला लागणारं पाणी हे या रामनदीमधून स्वच्छ पद्धतीने वापरलं जायचं. या ठिकाणी जो कुंड दिसतो, या नदीच्या कडेला जो कुंड आहे, इथं सोमेश्वराचं एक मंदिर आहे. या सोमेश्वर मंदिरामध्ये जे भाविक भक्तिभावाने येतात आणि आपलं एक पुण्यकर्म म्हणून या नदीला पैसारूपी दान अर्पण करायचे. हे पैसे ज्यावेळेस ते कुंडात टाकले जायचे किंवा या कुंडाच्या मागे एक मोठा हौद आहे, त्या हौदामध्ये टाकलं जायचं. ज्यावेळेस आम्ही वरून पाहायचो की याच्यामध्ये एक पैसा दिसतोय, तर तो पैसा शोधण्याकरता आम्ही या कुंडामध्ये पोहायचो आणि तो पैसा शोधून काढायचो. तो आम्ही पाण्यामध्ये पूर्णपणे डोळे उघडूनच आम्हाला तो पैसा दिसायचा. पूर्वी सर्व गुरे गाय ज्या डोंगरावर चरायला जायच्या, ह्या दुपारी साधारणपणे 3-4च्या दरम्यान या नदीला यायच्या आणि आपल्याला पाणी पिऊन पुन्हा एकदा चरण्यासाठी परत जायच्या. त्या नदीला आपलं जे पूर्वीचं जे रूप होतं की जे आपण नदीमध्ये जे स्वच्छता होती, जी पाणी पैसे टाकलेले जे दिसायचे वरून, आज ते रूप या ड्रेनेज लाईनमुळं पूर्णपणे गायब झालेला आहे. सांडपाणी रूपी जो राक्षस या नदीला लागलेला आहे, तो राक्षस जर थांबवायचा असेल तर आपण सर्वांनी एकत्र येऊन या राक्षसाला विरोध करून आणि हे सांडपाणी थांबवलं कसं जाईल ह्याचा विचार करण्यासाठी आपण सर्वांनी एकत्र येऊन रामनदी वाचवण्यासाठी मदत करावी.
माझं लग्न झालं त्यावेळी सोनमळा नाव होतं आमच्या शेतीला. माझं ते घर 77 साली रामनदी मुळा नदी याच्या संगमावर होतं. त्यावेळी इतकं पाणी स्वच्छ होतं की आम्ही त्याच्यावर शेती करायचो आणि पाणी वापरण्यासाठी, पिण्यासाठी, शेतीसाठी नैसर्गिक होतं. आणि आता ते तसं पाणी नाही राहिलेलं.
पाण्याचे कॉर्पोरेशन नळ नव्हते, तेव्हापासून इथं नदीमध्ये आम्ही इथं आंघोळ केली, इथंच पाणी प्यायचो. आणि आता असं झालं आहे की ड्रेनेजच्या लाईनी सोडल्यामुळे नदीचं विद्रुपीकरण झालेले आणि आमच्या गावातील संपूर्ण लहान मुलं आम्ही त्यावेळेस इथं आंघोळ करायचो. इथं आंघोळ करून इथं वरती शाळे होते, इथं शाळेमध्ये इथून जायचो आम्ही. इथून आम्ही संपूर्ण इथनं पळत जायचो, खाली कुंडामध्ये उडी टाकायचो. इथनं वरतूनसुद्धा आम्ही नदीला पूर आला पावसाळ्यात, वरून आम्ही इथं खाली उडी टाकायचो. आणि आता सध्या ड्रेनेजचं पाणी आल्यामुळे संपूर्ण नदीचं मध्ये डास, सगळे घाण, पालापाचोळा सगळा इथं साचलेला आहे.
Hello and welcome to the second edition of this online Ram Nadi festival. In today's session, we are going to take you to a point where the Ram Nadi becomes a very unique ecosystem. As many of you would have already seen or experienced on the Ram Nadi, it's a very small, narrow and a short, nondescript kind of a river. It distinctly lacks any kind of features or a personality. But at one point of time, it breaks up into a spectacular sight. And that's the point where I'm standing on right now. And that's the Pashan Lake. So we're going to describe this beautiful Pashan Lake today to you. And we have with us for this two very interesting personalities. One is Dr. Mandar Datar from the very reputed Agharkar Research Institute. Agharkar Research Institute has done seminal work on flora of India and especially on the aquatic diversity of Pashan Lake. So welcome, Dr. Mandar. We also have with us Manasi Karandikar from Oikos for Ecological Services. Manasi has been working on the Pashan Lake and the ecosystems in and around Pune and the Sahyadri for the last 20 years. So I welcome Manasi to this session also. With us are also a bunch of people who are very excited to experience the Pashan Lake with these experts. So without wasting any further time, let us walk through this beautiful ecosystem.
So, when you talk about aquatic ecosystems in Pune, there are two major groups. So, one is the rivers, as you know, you have Pauna, Mula, Mutha, and this is a kind of a man-made ecosystem, but lake ecosystem. So, lake ecosystem is slightly different from a riparian ecosystem. So, in riparian, you can expect canopies of trees, but in lake ecosystem, so Pashan Lake was once upon a time kind of a saucer shaped, and it has a very shallow or gentle slopes, and that forms the very unique composition of aquatic vegetation. The vegetation composed of two different components. One group is aquatic species and other is wetland or marshy species. So technically aquatic species and wetland species have differences. So aquatic species are often exposed to water throughout the year, and marshy species or wetland species are partly exposed to water. So technically, if you want to classify them, aquatic species have their reproductive stages. They are also associated with water. So they are physiologically bound to water. And in case of wetlands or marshy species, once you have at the arrival of winter, the water recedes down and then they start flowering until probably say month of May. They bloom. So you have a transition of various species blooming on the edges, and that determines the lake ecosystem as such. So there are many species, but when you talk about the actual species associated with aquatic ecosystems, so which are there inside the lake and on the edges of the lake. So inside the lake you have three kinds of species, group of species. So one is submerged species. They are submerged inside the water, so they do all their life processes inside the water. The other group is they are floating, so they are kind of free floating system. So they have majority of their portion like roots, stem, and often leaves are on the surface of water, but the flowers are above the water level, above the surface of water, and they are free floating. And the third type of group is they are rooted, but they are freely kind of leaves are floating on the surface. These are three groups inside when you talk about the actual reservoir, actual water.
So they are rooted means they need soil.
They need soil, so soil is very important. And then when you on the edge you have many interesting species. As I told you, as water recedes down, various species are exposed. They start flowering, they fruit, they disperse their seeds remain there, and when your next season coming up, they will flower. So it's a annual process, but so annual species, short-lived species. Sometimes we often term them as ephemerals, short-lived species. But the aquatic species, which are floating or submerged, they are probably perennial species.
Can we see the examples of these three types of species here?
Presently, you can see all hyacinth covering the entire surface, but there are examples. Means people have recorded from Pashan Lake. So there were two distinct studies which I can refer it now. So one was done by Agharkar Research Institute, our institute. In 70s, they carried out a study on aquatic ecosystems, aquatic species or marshy species from entire Pune region. So that time they recorded as many as 133 species, of which 71 were recorded from exclusively from Pashan Lake. So that much diversity once upon a time this lake had. And other post that probably ecological society has conducted a study. They recorded 111 species, but that includes arboreal species surrounding. So that also indicates that slowly the composition is changing. Once it was an aquatic ecosystem, it's now turning to a terrestrial kind of ecosystem. There is a species called Vallisneria spiralis. There's a genus called Hydrilla. Those are all submerged species. So they don't produce as beautiful flowers as other angiosperms surrounding this lake show. Then in case of floating species, you have a fern called Salvinia. Then you have many other species like there is a aquatic family called Najadaceae, in which we have Aponogeton and Potamogeton. They are floating, and then rooted floating are water lilies. Water lily is the best example.
So right now we only see the floating type. So why don't we see the other type of species that you mentioned?
One of the reason why we see hyacinth most commonly here is this it's now eutrophicated habitat. Presently, as the entire area is covered by hyacinth, sunlight doesn't enter, and then you have fight. So there is a food chain, entire food chain going on. So you have phytoplanktons, zooplanktons, then small algae, microscopic or in multicellular, but small algae, and then we have many other components of that food chain. But since the area is entirely surface is covered, the sunlight doesn't penetrate inside, and then you have the entire food chain disturbed in the disturbed states. That's why you don't see that diversity which was expected to see, or probably 100 years back what we are seeing.
Mandar mentioned something about eutrophication of the lake. So what exactly does this eutrophication mean, and what does it, how does it impact the other organisms? He mentioned a little bit before.
Yeah, so eutrophication is essentially, to say very simply, it is the supply of one or two particular nutrients which overpowers the entire ecosystem. The plants which thrive upon those nutrients are the ones which proliferate. And that's exactly what you see in the Pashan Lake behind me right now. We see it covered with water hyacinth. And the reason for this extra supply of one particular nutrient is because of the way Ram Nadi is turned out to be right now. 100 years ago, the Ram Nadi was not really a perennial river. It had some amount of water coming throughout the year, which was because of the springs, which was because of the small streams which were merging with it. But nevertheless, we are in peninsular India and we are supposed to have rivers which are not truly perennial. But today, if you look at the Ram Nadi, it is a perennial river with ample water flowing in it. And what is this water? This water is nothing but the sewage which comes from the residential colonies of Aun, Baner, Pashan, all the communities which are living along the Ram Nadi. And that brings in excess loads of one particular nutrient, which could be the phosphates from the detergents, or which could be the sewage which is coming from the societies. And then the species which Mandar just described are not really the ones which thrive upon these nutrients. So there are other species which we term as invasive, because they proliferate, they really don't have a predator, their population is unchecked, so on and so forth. And therefore, what you see right now is this lake is overpowered by just one species of vegetation. And the other species which we just heard from Mandar are no longer able to survive in the ecosystem. So eutrophication is the proliferation of algal bloom, or something which happens in the water which does not allow the life forms to live other than one or two species. Life within the water requires oxygen which is in the available form, not from the H2O part. So it needs free oxygen which actually comes from atmosphere, and therefore it's called as the dissolved oxygen. So what this hyacinth and the pistia is doing right now is it is not allowing the surface, the atmosphere at the surface, to exchange the gases freely with the water, and that causes a significant drop in the dissolved oxygen. Typically, in an aquatic ecosystem, we say that we need around 8 ppm, parts per million, of dissolved oxygen in the water. Now, when that starts dropping, the life forms also start shrinking. And this is exactly what is happening right now.
Earlier, as Mandar has explained, that there are variety of floral species right from deep water to the shallower areas of the lake. Now, shallower areas of the lake, when they disappear, all this variety, it slowly degrades, and it exactly gets indicated into the bird species. So right now what we can do is we can use bird species as indicator of this ecosystem health. So currently what we are seeing is only the swamp hens or the purple moor hens. They are very widely spread on this hyacinth. But earlier all these areas were having two types of birds, bird groups. Okay, so one was waders and one was the diving or the ducks. Okay, so the ducks or the diving birds, they will use all the areas that have deep sections of the water. So they will not come to the shallower areas, and the shallower areas will be used by waders. The waders means they have long legs, so they can wade through the water and they can search their prey. Okay, so when this changed from a saucer shape to a bund situation, so the shallower areas have disappeared, and that is how we can't see any waders here. And earlier, both these groups were present in the Pashan Lake. So earlier studies have shown that there were many varieties of diving ducks also. Like there were some birds which were residential, like coot was there, then the cormorants, then the spot-billed ducks. All these are, yeah, jasanas. All these are residential birds. Now every bird has its own requirement of habitat. Like jasana, they need the areas which are covered with water lily leaves, and then they will walk over those leaves. Okay, so they have special adaptations of their legs to walk over those leaves. But they can't do it here now because there is hardly any lily now. Now entire area is with water hyacinth. So these are all the residential birds, but this lake was attracting lot of migratory birds also. So like we have seen migratory birds like gargani was there, then pygmy goose. Earlier it was called as cotton teal. So it was there. Then even northern pintail used to come. Shell ducks, they were also used to visit this area. So now we can't see any of these ducks. Like right now we are in that period of like migratory birds will start going away now. They will start going towards northern areas. But we can't see any of them right now. So that's the reason all these areas have changed, and we can see that in the bird diversity also. And as the flora or the plant diversity is base of an ecosystem, as that changed, the entire food chain or the food web which was dependent on those species have changed. So we can't see those same phytoplanktons, those same zooplanktons, the algal diversity that was there earlier. And that is how we can see that the bird diversity has decreased, because it has changed into the habitat, it has changed the food of those species, and now we can't see those species. So only two or three major species that we can see is the moorhens, then the ibis, and yeah, black-winged stilt. Not even black-winged stilt, because the area is not exposed. There is no water that is exposed, so they can't survive here. And the stilt are like waders, so they need shallower waters. So right now, whatever we see is only the deeper section of the water, not the shallow ones.
So what we are saying is technically even the life below water, apart from just the vegetation, has changed, right? Food will not be available to birds also, right?
Yeah.
Which is inside the water.
Yes.
Like fish, the variety of fish, quantity, and
Right.
can they survive below this?
No, they can't, because as the food chain has disrupted, because the entire, like from phytoplankton to maybe microscopic and then the crustaceans and fishes. So entire thing depend on this, what I would say, the balance of these microscopic organisms. So if it is not there, then the fish diversity also changes. Then the birds that are dependent on fishes, they are also not seen. Like the commonest bird, the cormorant, so they are the diving birds. So what they will do is they will dive down and they will search for fishes. But right now the fishes are not surviving because of all these things and the dissolved oxygen. That is the most critical part, because all these things require a certain level of dissolved oxygen. And if it is not there, then the entire system gets it collapses.
So Nanda, what is the uniqueness of Pashan Lake with respect to biodiversity? What are the unique species which have been reported in the lake?
So Pashan Lake is known for two very unique species which are named after Pashan Lake. So one species is of a green algae.
So there is a group of multicellular algae known as Kara. So there is a species called as Kara pashani named after this lake, and that exclusively was first time described from this and exclusively was used to occur in this lake. And there is a species of a fern allied group. So pteridophytes are vascular plants. Name of the species was Equisetum debile variety pashanensis. So these are the two species which are named after Pashan, which we should be proud of. So Karapashani is a kind of submerged species. Most of these algae, green algae grows as a submerged species, and Equisetums is a rooted species, comes out of the surface.
So, sir, what is the current status of these two species? Can we see it today?
Unfortunately, what has happened is the ecosystem has changed considerably to support these species, and in last 20 years, nobody has ever collected them. So now their existence is only restricted to the type collection and the original specimen which was collected from this.
So, you said that the ecosystem has changed. So, we would like to know what exactly has changed.
So ecosystem has changed, mean the vegetation assemblage, the community has changed considerably. So if I take you in a time machine and take you say 50 years back, the composition would have been totally different. So we would have found many interesting species here. Water lily was quite abundant here. There is a plant called nymphoides. We call it at Kumudin in Marathi. So that was once upon a time abundant species. Quite rare species like Crinum viviparum was there. Then we had many species of Aponogeton recorded from this ecosystem once upon a time. So wild relative of Saccharum, the sugarcane, Saccharum spontanearum was once upon a time was found associated with the general typha beds in and around the lake. And then you had many such diverse species growing there. And now the ecosystem has changed considerably and very few limited species are existing today.
Mandar, there was Eulofia also, na?
Yeah, Eulofia. I would like to talk about two interesting orchids growing here. So orchids often you associate with the charm and the beauty of the species. So one orchid was autumn orchid. We call as Shishiramari in Marathi, Eulofia pratensis. Once upon a time that species used to flower on the banks of the lake. Once water recedes down, it was a tuberous. Both orchids are having underground portion in the form of tuber. So this species used to sprout from those tubers and flower in January, February. Wonderful looking species. Another one was Zuxine statumatrica, another species of orchids. And unfortunately, we have lost both the species now because of we have lost the saucer shape of this lake now.
So the changes which Dr. Mandar just described are not a result of something which is happening to the flora per se. The communities have changed, that is what he said. These changes happen in the biological diversity because there is a significant disturbance in the physical diversity. And what has changed in the Pashan ecosystem over the last 20 years is that the banks have changed. Earlier, the banks were sloping, as we just described. But over a period of 3 to 4 years, there was a beautification project which converted the sloping banks into deeper banks, and there was rock pitching done on it, which means there is a destruction of the habitat for the natural flora which Dr. Datar just described. And once that flora loses its habitat, then that is no longer seen in this particular ecosystem. So changes like the pitching, changes like the plantations around the lake, which were mainly in the form of Nilgiri plantations, bamboo plantations, that has significantly changed the habitat. And therefore, the communities over time have changed.
And right now, we are also hearing some forest or arboreal birds here. Like we just heard the Tickell's blue flycatcher. And if these banks were shallower, if they were exposed without any trees, then we wouldn't have heard that. So earlier, this area being in a very semi-arid zone and without much vegetation, these forest birds were absent. But now, with the availability of this canopy, availability of this variety of vegetation, we can see those forest birds. But unlike that, this being a lake ecosystems, this forest bird being here indicates something else. So we don't see those waders, we don't see those diving ducks now, and we can hear more of the arboreal birds.
You said this aquatic system has changed now, but there are a variety of birds coming, species are increasing. So how does it really matter?
Yeah, that's a very good question. You know, we have citizens who come to us and say, so what if it's an arboreal terrestrial ecosystem? We see the birds in any case. If you see world over, birders or people who love looking at birds, photographers, they flock towards wetland ecosystems. And the reason is very simple, because the wetland ecosystems have got birds throughout the day. They are in the line of sight. You can see them easily. They are large birds. You know, the waders typically, other than the black-winged stilts or the swamp elves, the other birds are really large and they're very easy to spot. They're very easy to see. They sit in a flock, and the whole ecosystem looks very spectacular with all these birds covering. Now, if you change that from an aquatic ecosystem into a terrestrial ecosystem, then you'll have to come at a particular time of the day. It's very rare that you will spot a very interesting bird. Most of the birds that you spot here are the common ones. You might see an oriole coming and flying around. You will hear a tickle's blue, but it's not very easy to spot as the grey heron is easy to spot or the ibis is easy to spot. So for the citizen, for the lovers of nature, ecosystems which are wetlands or aquatic ecosystems which have wading zones are the ones which really attract the population.
I think that it's a point of management, because in this setting you can have both. Like you can have a shallower bank, and just along the bank you can have similar trail. So there is no need to change the banks to have these both ecosystems or these types of birds that are present in an aquatic ecosystem and in the forest habitat. So from this point we are able to see some of the birds. So these are mainly residential birds. They keep on traveling from one wetland to other. So we can see a grey heron here, then a purple heron, then there is also one painted stork. So all these are waders actually. This number of birds also indicate that there is some diversity of mollusks and fish which is presently available here. But they also, if you see there, where they are standing is on the water hyacinth. Actually they are supposed to stand on the ground and wade through the water. But right now, since they don't have any choice, they are wading through, or they are standing over the water hyacinth, and then they are trying to capture their prey. So what we are able to see here is that only those birds which are either walking on the hyacinth or which are wader type are being seen, but not a single duck is seen. Okay, because there is no water which is exposed. So ducks cannot survive in these waters which are completely covered with hyacinth. And one of the reason for ducks being absent here is that very low dissolved oxygen, then entire food chain till the ducks or till their prey like fishes or other like crustaceans in the water is not present.
So you can see this bund constructed here has also changed the dynamics of this particular land. So once upon a time this land area would have supported many marshy species, many interesting marshy species, but now all the terrestrial species, invasive and introduced species like this Parthenium, Gazargavat have been, you can see it here. In the background also you can see many species, pink flowered Gliricidias, those are plantation, eucalyptus you can see, Australian acacias you can see. So due to this construction of this bund, the dynamics of this entire bank has changed, and now soil quality has considerably changed, and then you can see a lot of invasion of non-native species here.
Why do we see those pink flowers there? Is there island there?
So we have a nice lawn type thing of water hyacinth, and in between we can see some patterns of vegetation where you are saying that the pink flower one vegetation is there, which he just said Besharam. Okay. So why we are seeing this changes in this pattern is because that there is sedimentation that has been happening in this lake, and this sedimentation is creating these islands, small islands. Okay, so this sedimentation is mainly happening because there is a lot of degradation that is happening in the catchment. Like in the Ram Nadi catchment, we can see that there is lot of development is happening, roads are going on, then there are many buildings, societies coming up. So all these things, they are changing this entire catchment, and the original vegetation is changing, the soil erosion is increasing, and all those things finally are landing into this lake. Because this lake is being bundled, there is no outlet for this sedimentation, and if we don't control this erosional activities, then this sedimentation will keep on happening, and which will eventually reduce the water holding capacity of this lake. There are other sources also, like the pollution load that is coming in. So that pollution load is it's coming from various sources, like highway is there, then there are variety of settlements, right from large societies to small settlements. Then there are some point sources where the temporary settlements are seen. So all these sources of pollution are obviously not treated, and they just land up here in the lake through various flows, and they sometimes they come as solid waste, sometimes they come as liquid waste directly entering into the lake, or sometimes they also come with the flows of water.
Sir, you have mentioned about few species of orchids which we have lost from the lake. So, is there any hope that we can get them back, and can we see them again?
So it's an interesting question. The orchid was growing here. The soil was taken from here for the construction of lawns in Pula Deshpande garden. The tubers were also carried with the soil. So orchid bloomed there for 1 year or so and then disappeared. We can certainly see that orchid again here, probably not by natural way of succession, but possibly these two species of orchids grow in other habitats, other places in Maharashtra. We can bring them back, probably take help of techniques like tissue culture, multiply them and introduce, and if the ecosystem similar to what existed once upon a time here, if we can get that back, we can certainly see those orchids here again. But our effort should be more inclined towards natural restoration than kind of introducing species. If the same kind of degradation continues, see like silting, eutrophication, growth of water hyacinth, limitations in growing other species, this will be slowly converted to a terrestrial ecosystem, and then lake will vanish in another say 50 years, 100 years down the line. So this has happened in Bangalore. As you know, many lakes have vanished in the recent years. Bharatpur is a quite interesting example where one time used to have wonderful wetland, now converted to a terrestrial habitat.
So what we really have is a choice. We can take the restoration path ahead, or we can leave the system to degrade into a terrestrial ecosystem as we just described. What makes a city unique? It's not flyovers, it's not skyscrapers, it's not metro rail. I think every city in India today has that. But if Pune is able to improve this riverine ecosystem, if this aquatic ecosystem, then we will have something which would be a very unique point for tourists, for the citizen, common citizen. So if we choose to take that path, then we need to restore this ecosystem to its natural state, or the state which it was at earlier about 30-40 years ago. And for that, we have an entire session on what we propose to do as a restoration plan for the Pashan ecosystem. So do watch that session also. To cut the long story short, if we are able to restore this ecosystem back into its natural habitat, then you would have all the waders coming back over the years. You would make this as a wonderful habitat for migratory birds to use this as a stopover. We could have the ground orchids springing back from the soil. We could have the vegetation which is actually native to this part coming back. Then we will have the birds and the insects coming back. In short, we will be able to restore the life sustaining capacity of this particular ecosystem. Every river has a natural tendency to purify itself. If the sewage added to it, if the pollution added to it is maintained within the carrying capacity of that ecosystem. Today we are unable to do that. If we are able to restrict our ingress of sewage, if we are able to curtail the pollution, the solid waste, the construction and demolition waste, then this ecosystem has a natural capacity to spring back to its original state. And that is what we are going to try to do with the restoration plan. We propose to use minimum technology. We don't want to burn more carbon to improve the ecosystem. We want to protect it. We want to allow the natural vegetation to grow back. We want to remove the invasive species. And we essentially want to create habitat which will bring back the original life forms onto this ecosystem.
The Ram Nadi is very polluted, yes, but efforts have begun to change this situation. The students of H.V. Desai College have implemented beds in the source region of the Ram Nadi. These beds are able to absorb toxic substances like heavy metals. Let's watch this next video to see what exactly these beds are and how the students implemented them for the Ram Nadi.
As you must be observing, this is a small lake which is there at Khatpewadi, which is the first stretch of Ram Nadi. Since this river is highly polluted, so we want to reduce the pollution of this particular river by applying ecological floating water beds.
And we were given an opportunity to participate in Ram Nadi Yuva Sansad, which is organized by Kirloskar Vasundhara. So on the account of the competition, we proposed our idea to restore Ram Nadi ecosystem. So basically our idea was ecological floating beds which would enhance the ecosystem of the Ram Nadi. We started with the project in 2020, but unfortunately due to COVID-19 pandemic, we could not continue with the process. We thought about it in between these 2 years, how exactly the model of the ecological floating bed would work.
So basically the making or the working of the ecological floating bed is done as follows. A squarish frame of PVC pipes is made and it is air sealed, and air is pumped through a cycle nozzle so that it would hold a lot of weight rather than the regular makeshift raft.
We have designed this prototype in the smaller scale first. We have tested it in a environment, and according to that modified it and then designed this final product.
A hard sturdy net is put on the lower side of the frame, and then another net is put on the on top of it, and in between that bed of coconut husk is applied. On the bed itself the plants are potted.
Different plants like kardal, which is Canna indica, as well as second plant mainly khas or vada. mainly Kardal. It absorbs the heavy metals like zinc, nickel, chromium, lead, etc. So they remove the pollutants or heavy metals which are there in the river water. And secondly, the khas or wala, it absorbs organic substances which are present in waters.
We have planted 9 plants in total, and the roots of these plants have been suspended in the water. As the water and the BOD of the water was very low, so we have suspended the roots in order so that they absorb the heavy metals such as cadmium, zinc and nickel from the water.
So the future outcome of the ecological floating bed will be the oxygen demand of the water body will increase, the fish life will increase, and the pollutants that are currently in very heavy amount will also gradually reduce.
जी अवस्था राम नदीला प्राप्त झालेली होती तिच्यामध्ये काहीतरी विधायक बदल केला पाहिजे असं किर्लोस्कर वसुंधरा या संस्थेला वाटलं. त्यांनी पुणे शहर आणि पुणे विद्यापीठातल्या कक्षेतल्या सर्व महाविद्यालयांसाठी अशी स्पर्धा जाहीर केली. याच्यामध्ये आमच्या महाविद्यालयाच्या विद्यार्थ्यांनी जे यश मिळवलं ते कौतुकास्पद आहे, परंतु त्यापेक्षा मला सगळ्यात जास्त महत्त्वाची गोष्ट अशी वाटते या विद्यार्थ्यांनी काहीतरी वेगळा विचार केला आणि स्वच्छ हात, समर्थ खांदे आणि तल्लख बुद्धी असलेला युवा वर्ग हा जर एकत्र आला तर तो काय करू शकतो हे सावित्रीबाई फुले पुणे विद्यापीठाचे विद्यार्थी आणि HV देसाई महाविद्यालयाचे असणारे आमचे विद्यार्थी यांनी हे दाखवून दिलेलं आहे.
Aren't lotuses beautiful? The Kharpewadi lake is hopefully soon going to have a bunch of lotuses on its waters, which were planted by environmentalist Sanjay Gurav. The next video shows how Mr. Gurav planted these lotuses in the lake through the Ram Nadi restoration mission. Maybe you can try it out too.
भारतीय कमळ इंडियन लोटसचं या ठिकाणी आज रोपण करण्यात येत आहे. या ठिकाणी 3 प्रकारचं रोपण करण्यात येत आहे. एक सीडच्या माध्यमातून, दुसरं जे आहे या सीडपासूनच जी रोपं तयार केली 1-1.5 महिन्यापूर्वी त्यामधून, आणि तिसरा जो आहे प्रकार तो बांबूच्या टोपलीमध्ये 3 महिन्याचे ट्यूबर त्यामध्ये टाकून ते ट्यूबर डेव्हलप केलेले आहेत. तर आज आपण या ठिकाणी जे बीजारोपण करत आहोत त्याच्यामधला जो प्रकार आहे ही गोनपाटाची किंवा जी साखरेची गव्हाची पोती असतात त्याचा हा कापड आहे. तर याच्यामध्ये माती आणि याचं वजन वाढावं त्याकरता तळात जाऊन बुडली पाहिजे, ही तळाशी गेली पाहिजे म्हणून याच्यामध्ये काही दगडसुद्धा 2-3 टाकलेली आहे आणि प्रत्येक याच्यामध्ये 2-2 बिया मी टाकत आहे. 4 ते 5 दिवसामध्ये याच्यामधून कोंब बाहेर यायला लागतील आणि 21 दिवसानंतर या रोपांची उंची 2 ते 3 फूट होईल. संक्रांत सणाला सुवासिनी 5 सुगडी मातीची मडकी ही इको फ्रेंडली वाण आहे. तर याच्या माध्यमातून वाण देवाणघेवाण करतात. यामध्ये सुद्धा याच्या गळ्यापर्यंत माती भरायची, ती चांगली आतमध्ये दाबून घ्यायची. त्यामध्ये सुद्धा आम्ही 2 बी टाकत आहे आणि वरून पूर्ण माती पुन्हा प्रेस करून टाकत आहे. हा कमळाचा एक ट्यूबर आहे. याचं आयुष्य किमान 7 ते 8 महिन्याचं आयुष्य आहे या ट्यूबरचं. याला असे हे कोंब फुटलेले आहेत. असे जर ट्यूबर तुमच्याकडे असतील तर त्याला लवकरच फ्लॉवरिंग व्हायला लागते आणि सीडपासून फ्लॉवरिंग व्हायला किमान 7 महिने आणि जास्तीत जास्त 15 ते 16 महिने लागू शकतात. हा ट्यूबर असा या सुगड्यांमध्ये मी रुतवलेला आहे आणि यामध्ये त्याच्या तोंडापर्यंत पूर्ण माती भरून द्यायची आणि नंतर जिथं भरपूर गाळ आहे त्या ठिकाणी हा सुगडा हे मडकं त्या ठिकाणी फसून द्यायचं आहे.
A picture is worth 1,000 words, isn't it? The Ram Nadi Restoration Mission has created big paintings on the walls of a school on the banks of Ram Nadi. These paintings talk of the plight of the river and how children can be involved in its restoration and conservation. Let's watch this next video about these paintings and hear from the teachers of the school.
पुणे म्हटलं की मुळा मोठा नदी लगेच डोळ्यासमोर येते, पण राम नदी काही डोळ्यासमोर येत नाही, कारण ती आपल्याला तेवढीशी माहिती नाहीये. पण पुण्यातून वाहणारी राम नदी ही आणखी एक नदी आहे, तर तिची सध्या अवस्था फार बिकट आहे. तर तिचं पुनरुज्जीवन करावं या हेतूने राम नदी पुनरुज्जीवन प्रकल्प हा सुरू झालेला आहे. आता पुणे महानगरपालिकेच्या या नदीच्या काठावर काही शाळा आहेत, तर ह्या विद्यार्थ्यांना जर या नदीच्या प्रकल्पाशी जोडून घेतलं तर नक्की त्यांच्यामध्ये नदीच्या रक्षणाची प्रेरणा निर्माण होईल. आणि आताचा काळ हा पालकांकडून मुलांना मार्गदर्शन करण्याऐवजी मुलांकडून पालकांपर्यंत पोहोचण्याचा आहे, आणि हा उपाय अगदी यशस्वी होतो असा माझा इतके वर्षाचा अनुभव आहे. या प्रकल्पामध्ये आधीच साधारण अनेक शाळांमध्ये भिंती पण रंगून झाल्या आहेत, भिंतीवरनं पण पर्यावरणाचा संदेश मुलांना गेला आहे, आणि अनेक ॲक्टिव्हिटीजमध्ये मुलांना घेऊन मुलांना नदीचं महत्त्व पटवून सांगणं आणि नदीविषयी माहिती देणं, यामुळे नदी स्वच्छ राहायला नक्की मदत होईल याचा मला विश्वास वाटतो. आणि या प्रकल्पाला, राम नदी पुनरुज्जीवन प्रकल्पाला मी खूप खूप शुभेच्छा देते.
किर्लोस्कर उद्योग समूहाचे संस्थापक श्री शंतनुराव किर्लोस्कर यांनी अनेक दशकांपूर्वी सामाजिक बांधिलकीविषयक एक आदर्श घालून दिला. लहान मुलांवर काम करा, त्यांच्यामध्ये आरोग्यविषयक सवयी, स्वच्छतेविषयक सवयी आणि पर्यावरणाविषयक सवयी यांचे संस्कार करा. साहजिकच नवीन पिढी निर्माण होणारी ही एक जबाबदार पिढी म्हणून निर्माण होईल. RRM स्कूल प्रोजेक्ट रामनदी परिसरातील सर्व शाळा, त्यातील शिक्षक आणि विद्यार्थी हे या उपक्रमाद्वारे रामनदी रिस्टोरेशन मिशनच्या कार्यात जोडले जाणार आहेत. येती काही वर्ष हे सर्व विद्यार्थी नदीविषयक आरोग्य, नदीचे सौंदर्य, नदीच्या परिसराबद्दल शास्त्रीय दृष्टिकोन आणि त्याला आवश्यक असलेली पर्यावरणपूरक जीवनशैली याबद्दलचे शिक्षण या उपक्रमाद्वारे घेतील.
आपल्या शाळेमध्ये किर्लोस्कर वसुंधरा यांच्यातर्फे शाळेमध्ये 3 पेंटिंग्स तयार केलेली आहेत राम नदीची.
या चित्रांमधून विद्यार्थ्यांना नदीमध्ये कचरा टाकू नये किंवा शालेय परिसरामध्ये कचरा न टाकता तो डस्टबिनमध्येच जमा करावा याविषयी या चित्रातून त्यांना सांगितलं गेलेलं आहे आणि आम्ही ते विद्यार्थ्यांपर्यंत पोहोचवण्याचं काम करणार आहोत.
आपली राम नदी हा एक अतिशय स्तुत्य आणि चांगला उपक्रम आमच्या शाळेत राबवला आणि त्याचा एक भाग म्हणून त्यांनी आमच्या शाळेमध्ये दर्शनी भागामध्ये काही पेंटिंग काढले. तर त्यातलं हे एक पेंटिंग माझ्या पाठीमागं दिसतं तुम्हाला, हे एक पेंटिंग आहे. तर या पेंटिंगमध्ये अतिशय सुंदर आणि बोलकी माहिती दिली की नदीचा नैसर्गिक स्रोत कसा हवा आणि तो आत्ता कसा आहे आणि तो कसा असायला पाहिजे. आपण प्रयत्न केले तर तो कसा होईल. पहिल्या चित्रात जर आपण पाहिलं तर सगळीकडे तुम्हाला या ठिकाणी वेस्टेज दिसते, नदी अतिशय प्रदूषित दिसते, पर्यावरणाने ती शहर तो एरियासुद्धा खराब दिसतो. दुसऱ्या चित्रामध्ये मुलांनी स्वयंस्फूर्तीने मला अतिशय सुंदर या ठिकाणी पुढाकार घेतला, स्वतःला इन्व्हॉल्व केलं, नदी या ठिकाणी स्वच्छ केलेली आहे.
गणेश खिंडपासून जवळ असलेली राम नदी ही अतिशय मोठी नदी होती, परंतु प्रदूषणाने ती आता अतिशय लहान झालेली आहे. ही नदी आपण स्वच्छ करायला हवी अशी प्रेरणा देण्यासाठी हे पेंटिंग्स शाळांमध्ये दिलेले आहेत. त्यामुळे मुलांना सुद्धा आपलं पर्यावरण स्वच्छ आणि सुंदर राखावं असा संदेश मुलांपर्यंत पोहोचवलेला आहे. पर्यावरण संरक्षण ही आता काळाची गरज आहे आणि त्या दृष्टीने त्यांनी टाकलेलं हे पाऊल खरोखरच अतिशय स्तुत्य आहे.